Where are my rebalancing glasses? Where are they? Oh, there they are. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Project Pocket Monster, the series where we go through and we tweak and balance old Pokemon and new Pokemon who have become unviable in the current meta due to something known as power creep. Now, I've explained power creep a number of times in my videos, but basically, it's when new utilities or abilities are introduced that make old ones irrelevant. Now, you see that all the time in a series like Pokemon. Obviously, Pokemon in new generations have better abilities, some of them have better stats, better move pools, and some of the other ones previously are left by the wayside. Our goal is to go through and tweak the stats, the abilities, the move pools, and the typings of old Pokemon to make them more unique, as well as more viable in the current metagame. Now, as we go through and we balance, there are a few assumptions that we have to make. If you're not new to the series, and you know all of the assumptions that we're going to be explaining here, you can skip to this time right here and we'll get you on with the rebalancing. But if you are new to the series, this is the first video you've watched, or you have never checked this assumptions portion of the video, stick around. It'll provide a lot of context for how we balance these Pokemon going forward. So, the assumptions are, we're not changing the type chart and type matchups. Ice is still super effective against grass. Steel is still super effective against ice. Fire is still super effective against ice. Ice is weak to a lot of things, etc., etc. We're not changing the effects of abilities. Bad abilities, Leaf Guard, Early Bird, Keen Eye. They're bad. They're going to stay bad. We're not going to change what they do. Even good abilities, we're not going to change what good abilities do. We're not changing the base power or power points of moves. We're not going to give Drain Punch 32 PP. We're not going to make Superpower a base 50 move instead of a base 120, stuff like that. And the most important thing is that these changes have to fit thematically. What does this mean? So these changes have to make sense based on a previously established lore and Pokédex entries. So, why would Quagsire be able to learn Sacred Fire? Why would it be able to? It's a mudfish, so we're not going to give it something like Sacred Fire. We're not going to give Charizard Storm Drain. It's said that Charizard is weak to water, doesn't like it when its tail fire goes out. It could even die, so obviously we're not going to give it something that boosts off of water-type moves. It doesn't fit with the lore. It doesn't fit with the Pokédex entries, so we're not going to do it. Every change that we make has to make sense thematically. So keep in mind, guys, this is also a meta without any of the cyclical stuff that Game Freak either decides or doesn't decide will be in their games. A lot of the new stuff like Mega Evolution, Z-Moves, and Dynamaxing or Gigantamaxing, we don't know if they will return, will be staples in the series, etc., etc. So we're not going to include them when we're talking about balancing Pokemon. For instance, Mawile. Mawile is absolutely a fine Pokemon if you consider that she has a Mega Evolution. But considering we're not taking into account Mega Evolutions, Mawile needs a little bit of work. That all being said, guys, keep in mind that all of these changes, all this theory craft is all for fun. I'd love to hear your ideas down in the comments. If you agree with me, disagree with me. In the past few videos, people have been doing calcs of certain things, expressing their love for certain aspects of what I've done, distaste for certain aspects that I've done, that sort of thing. I really appreciate a lot of that stuff. Let's get right into the balancing. Into Electrode. Now, Electrode is known for a couple things. Now, it is the fastest Pokemon in Generation 1, and that's pretty much its claim to fame. It's also known for being a pretty good screen setter, as well as a suicide lead for weather teams. Like, it can just damp rock, rain dance, it can explode, and that's pretty much all Electrode is supposed to do. But I think that that's actually not enough for Electrode. Now, when we talk about what we're going to do to improve Electrode, we have to think about what and who Electrode is competing with. Right off the bat, the first thing that I think about when I think of Electrode is... Now, I want to preface this. I balanced Electrode before Regieleki's stat spread or move pool came out, so you're going to see some similarities as to what we do, but keep in mind that Electrode will be able to do different things than Regieleki and won't exactly be a carbon copy. That being said, let's take a look at what we can do to some of its abilities. Now, Aftermath is a very good ability, and it's also pretty thematic with what Electrode is. Electrode is known to just explode when it wants to, deal residual damage to whoever comes in contact with it, so after it gets knocked out, taking 25% from an opponent's health makes total sense and is actually pretty cool. Soundproof and Static. This is a case of abilities that have been carried with Electrode pretty much throughout its entire career that don't necessarily help it all too much. A passive paralysis from Static is pretty nice, but Soundproof is almost never going to come in handy. So, I'm opting to get rid of Soundproof for Motor Drive. as well as static for Galvanize. Now, both of these make sense to me. Electrode is very, very fast electric type. Being able to absorb electric type moves and get faster off of it, I think makes a lot of sense. Galvanize, it's quite literally an Electrode. I think that giving Electrode Galvanize is very cool, especially with some of the tools that we're going to give it. You look at Electrode's stat spread. I decided to give it 10 points into its attack stat, subtract 10 points from its defense, 20 points from its special defense, and dump 25 points into speed. Now, what is the logic behind all of this? Well, being the fact that Electrode is now base 175 speed, I thought that having its defensive profile be 60, 70, 80 was a little too generous for it. So I opted to cut back on some of Electrode's bulk. It is now very fast. I didn't touch its special attack at all, so it can still hit decently hard with a special attacking move. But why 175 speed? Well, at base 175, at level 100, Electrode outspeeds positive-natured 252 Invest Choice Scarf users at base 100 speed, like Jirachi, Celebi, Manaphy, those type of Pokemon, by 1 point. It puts Electrode at base 493 speed. This is important because now Electrode doesn't need to boost its speed at all. It can work as a revenge killer without having to run a Choice Scarf or anything like that. It opens up an item slot for Choice Specs if you really want to, as well as being able to get off its support options totally fast and almost completely free. I gave it 10 points into its attack stat because of some of the moves we're going to give it. So let's just get rid of some of the moves then, shall we? Same type attack bonus. I want to give Electrode Rising Voltage, Generation 8 move, totally should have it. Aura Wheel, Parabolic Charge, and Overdrive. The last three, Aura Wheel, obviously the signature move of Morpeko. I think it makes sense. Electrode rolls. It also boosts its speed stat by 1, as well as being a physical electric type move. Parabolic Charge allows Electrode to potentially heal up a little bit. Parabolic Charge is also not very strong, so it's not a huge deal. And Overdrive, it already has access to a number of different electric type moves. Overdrive doesn't necessarily help it, but it is nice just sort of to have it on its moveset. This is where we get to the big things that we're going to give Electrode now. As far as its coverage moves, Electrode is very fast. Base 175 speed, it's absolutely blistering. I want to give it extreme speed. I want to have Electrode have Galvanize Extreme Speed as one of its options. Now, coming off a base 60 attack is nothing crazy. It's not going to be doing crazy amounts of damage to anything, but it is the only user of Galvanize Extreme Speed, which I think is pretty unique. I want to give it Galvanize Rapid Spin as well. Being able to come in, potentially support its teammates, get rid of hazards, get rid of rocks, sticky webs, that sort of thing, while also being able to potentially set screens, pivot out with Volt Switch, Revenge Kill with Extreme Speed, just gives another layer to what Electrode can do as a Pokemon. It's literally a ball. It makes total sense for it to spin. It rolls around to literally move. I thought that it's kind of crazy that Electrode does not have access to Rapid Spin already. And then I also want to give it Bug Buzz. And I thought that Bug Buzz, well, not just, obviously it's not a bug, it's not buzzing, but it is sort of thematic for what Electrode is, as well as gives it another option to hit Grass-type Pokemon and Psychic-type Pokemon a little bit better. Setup and support, I want to give it Magnetic Flux, Electrify, and Electric Terrain, as well as the big one being Memento. I'm also surprised Electrode has not gotten Memento previously. Memento, what it does is it kills you in exchange for harshly dropping the opposing Pokemon's attack stat and special attack stat. This means that Electrode has a number of tools at its disposal. It can set Electric Terrain, it can Revenge Kill with Galvanize Extreme Speed, it can get away hazards with Galvanize Rapid Spin or regular Rapid Spin, it can boost its own speed with Aura Wheel, it can come in on electric type attacks with Motor Drive. Aftermath is potentially still a good ability for it. If it gets knocked out, it can do a big chunk of damage to the opposing Pokemon. It has access to Memento now, which means that after all is said and done, if it sets up screens, if it Volt Switches, if it's done the duty of being this momentum generator, which I think that Electrode previously has been, it can then Memento out and very easily get something in that's able to either sweep or start wall breaking. Electrode, in my mind, has always been a very fast support Pokemon, and the tools that we gave it let it do that job just a little bit better and actually make it quite good. Base 175 speed is very, very good, but having this sort of lackluster offense with base 60 attack and base 80 special attack, in my mind, means that it's not too crazy broken. Although it is very good Galvanize Explosion even is an option, only coming off a base 60 attack, but it's still very good and could hit potentially hard, especially if it hits super effectively. Keep in mind that I did balance this Electrode before Regieleki. It's not as fast as Regieleki, doesn't hit as hard as Regieleki, but it does have slightly better move pool than Regieleki, so that means that this thing, while it's sort of outclassed, it still has a few minor niche uses that it can use over its Electric Generation 8 counterpart. Exeggutor. Exeggutor is very outclassed by a number of different grass types for a number of different reasons. Now, 530 base stat total is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. However, Exeggutor uses it very strangely. It's got a pretty high HP stat, pretty high attack stat, very high special attack stat, but everything else is either average to less than average. So, Chlorophyll, not a crazy good ability on something with only base 55 speed. There are other Chlorophyll users that outclass it. Harvest, while this is probably the ability you're going to run most of the time, Exeggutor as a grass psychic type has a lot of weaknesses, so it's not necessarily going to be sticking around long enough to be able to set up, potentially protect, substitutes, leech seed, harvest, that sort of thing. Having this sort of defensive typing being a really big boon for it is definitely hurts Exeggutor in the long run. Grass Psychic, you see it all the time, being weak to Bug Buzz, being weak to U-Turn, especially even if Exeggutor is behind a substitute and getting these harvests off, it could just get Bug Buzzed. Bug Buzz goes right through the substitute. It can get Sucker Punched. It can get Shadow Sneaked. It's weak to a few different forms of priority. There's a lot that is wrong with Exeggutor just because of its typing. Its stats are actually pretty good. Now, when I went to change Exeggutor, I was looking at his Pokédex entries, and so many of the entries referred to it as a walking jungle. So Exeggutor, in my opinion, needs a good third ability. Now, what should that ability be? Well, I think that ability should be Grassy Surge. It's literally referred to as a walking jungle. Now, what this means for Exeggutor is that upon entry, it's already done its job. Previously, it would have to set up, it would have to be boosted by Sun, it would need to be behind a substitute, be racking up harvests. Now, all of a sudden, Exeggutor can just come in, set up grassy terrain, it's getting Leech Seed, leftover recovery, and now all of a sudden its grass type moves hit a lot harder, as well as it actually has a spot on the team to support its teammates. So as far as its stats go, I opted to subtract 20 points from its regular attack stat and dump them directly into its defense stat, making its defensive profile 95, 105, 75. I think that's actually pretty fair for a Pokemon of Exeggutor's stature, if you will. It's quite literally a tree. I think that it makes sense for its defense stat to be a little bit higher than it actually is right now. What this does, especially in combined with grassy terrain, lets it take a bunch of ground type moves. It lets it have reliable recovery without even having to run leftovers, being able to get sort of this passive recovery, especially if it's going to be taking a U-turn, something's going to pivot out of it. It might be able to take a U-turn a lot better at 105 defense than it would be able to at 85 defense, especially if that U-turn is coming from something that it does not have same type attack bonus on, like a Ambipom or, a bird like Staraptor, etc., that sort of thing. This keeps Exeggutor's base stat total at 530, and I actually don't think Exeggutor needs to be changed much outside of giving it access to this Grassy Surge ability. It already gets access to Grassy Glide. Yes, this does make Exeggutor sort of reminiscent of Rillaboom, but keep in mind, Exeggutor's new base attack stat is only 75, so Grassy Glide is actually not as crazy as it could be. It's actually weaker than Thwacky's Grassy Glide, so if you want to put that into perspective, that means that if you want to run a physical Exeggutor with priority, by all means go for it. It's nowhere near its optimal set. As far as the moves that I want to give regular Exeggutor, I want to give it Grav Apple, I want to give it Synchronize, and coverage, I want to give it Earth Power and Body Press. And as far as setup and support goes, I want to give it another Generation 8 move in Jungle Healing. Now what Jungle Healing does is it heals a status and also heals 25% HP. This is nothing crazy. Exeggutor already gets Synthesis, but Jungle Healing is an option for if you want to run Exeggutor in a grassy terrain team in doubles, in VGC, or if you want to get rid of a status like a Toxic or something that may be plaguing your Exeggutor. Grav Apple. Makes sense to me. Exeggutor literally has heads for fruit, One of those heads drops off, becomes an Exeggutor, hits the opponent on the head. Grav Apple drops the target's defense by 1 stage. So this means that you can't stay in on an Exeggutor who is Grav Appling you constantly. It's the same thing as sort of Apple Acid, who drops your special defense, but I think it makes sense for Exeggutor to get this move, especially considering it only has base 75 attack now. It is not going to be hitting crazy hard. It will be doing more damage in grassy terrain, but I don't think it's anything crazy. Synchronoise is a psychic type move that I think doesn't have nearly the dispersion that I think it should. This lets Exeggutor hit Amoonguss, Venusaur, Tangrowth, stuff that has a grass type for pretty good neutral or super effective damage. Earth Power makes sense to me, it's quite literally a tree. And Body Press also makes sense. Lots of Pokemon now get Body Press. Exeggutor is quite literally a tree. If you ran into a tree, especially with this defense stat, it is going to hurt. This makes Exeggutor only the 3rd grassy terrain setter behind Rillaboom and Tapu Bulu, and arguably Exeggutor is still the worst of the 3. However, being able to come on the field, do its job, set the terrain, potentially set up for a teammate, have recovery in Leech Seed, potentially a superpowered Giga Drain, really helps Exeggutor establish a presence and helps it vie for a spot on a team a lot more than it was able to previously. You may be able to overlook these weaknesses that this grass psychic type has for Exeggutor, especially considering it now can put in work as a terrain setter as well as overall just a supportive Pokemon. This brings us to Alolan Exeggutor, who is better than its Cantonian counterpart in a number of ways. For starters, it's got a better typing. Grass Dragon, much better than Grass Psychic. It now has more resistances as well as less weaknesses overall. It's got a better attacking stat. Access to the move in Dragon Hammer lets it actually hit very, very hard. It's got a lower speed stat, which at first glance you might think, oh, well, that doesn't really help it. It actually helps it be a Trick Room wall breaker a little bit better. Frisk is a better ability than Chlorophyll. Regular Exeggutor is probably never going to run Chlorophyll, but Alolan Exeggutor can run Frisk. It can check out the opponent's item. It also has access to Harvest, which it can actually run these Harvest, Protect, Leech Seed sets a little bit better than regular Exeggutor just due to the nature of its better typing. And overall, Alolan Exeggutor is a better Pokemon than regular Exeggutor. Now, we did give regular Exeggutor Grassy Terrain, but I'm going to opt not to give Alolan Exeggutor Grassy Surge. So, for Alolan Exeggutor, I recognize it as a physical attacker. Now, as far as its stats go, I want to give it 20 points into its attack stat, puts it at 125. This makes it so that it is the physical version of regular Exeggutor. Regular Exeggutor has 125 in its special attack. I don't think that 125 special attack for Alolan Exeggutor makes a whole lot of sense. It's just, it slams people with its tree trunk, Dragon Hammer, etc., that sort of thing. I'm going to give it the same 20 points into its defense stat. I'm going to subtract 50 points from its special attack stat to make it even with regular Exeggutor's base 75 attack stat now. And I'm also going to give it 10 points to its speed, boosting it to 55, letting it be exactly the same speed tier as regular Exeggutor. So I already think that Alolan Exeggutor is usable. So I'm opting not to give it Grassy Surge. However, we're going to give it the ability in Natural Cure. As a physical attacking Grass Dragon type, Alolan Exeggutor can take a lot of advantage of Natural Cure. If something comes in and it outspeeds and it Will-O-Wisps it, it can take a hit from Alolan Exeggutor, but as soon as Alolan Exeggutor leaves, that burn is cured. That means that Alolan Exeggutor is still a threat. It is still able to come back in and able to threaten it with physical attacks because its burn goes away. Now, to separate Alolan Exeggutor from other Grass Dragon types, obviously Flapple is a Dragon Dancer. It's a Hustle user. It's a physical attacker, but it also is faster and frailer than Alolan Exeggutor. It can't function under Trick Room. And Appleton is a Grass Dragon type who is very defensive, very specially defensive, with thick fat, able to take hits, potentially not hit as hard, and it's also slower than Alolan Exeggutor. So this is the middle ground. Now, Alolan Exeggutor is a speed tier between the two of them, while also having a higher attack stat than Flapple, as well as better defense stat than both of them, as well as having access to Natural Cure. This sort of separates Alolan Exeggutor from the others, having the ability to frisk an item, having the ability to harvest a berry, also a couple things that go a long ways to make Alolan Exeggutor unique. As far as the moves that I'm going to give it the exact same moves as I'm going to give regular Exeggutor, with the exception of Dragon Tail instead of Synchronoise. I think that a lot more Dragon types should get Dragon Tail, but I also think it doesn't make sense for Alolan Exeggutor to get Synchronoise, as it is not a Psychic type, and Dragon is already super effective against Dragon, so it's kind of redundant. Earth Power makes sense, Body Press makes sense. Jungle Healing, once again, it's another option to heal status. Heal Exeggutor just a little bit more. I think that having its attack stat boosted, as well as its defense stat boosted, as well as access to Natural Cure, makes Alolan Exeggutor a very unique Grass Dragon type. Lets it heal off status, lets it hit very hard, lets it come in as sort of this offensive pivot, being able to scare things out with superpowered Dragon Hammers or Wood Hammers, potentially heal it off with Leech Seed Synthesis, Harvest Set, checking a Pokemon's item for Frisk. I think that this adds a lot of value to Alolan Exeggutor as a Pokemon, and although Alolan Exeggutor already was a pretty decent Pokemon, I think that these extra coverage moves, especially in Body Press and Grab Apple, really goes a long way to help it as a physically oriented Grass Dragon type. Hey guys, if you made it this far, you're at the halfway point of the video. Just want to remind you to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoy this sort of content. I am a one-man show. I do all the editing, uploading, recording, everything. I do literally everything, all the animations, the little graphic you see right there. Oh, my hand disappeared. Oh my god. Now, I'm not going to keep you from the rebalancing any longer. Don't want to waste any of your time. Let's just get right back into it then, shall we? Do you guys remember 2001? Okay, because I really don't, because that was the last time that regular Marowak was any sort of good in Pokemon Gold and Silver. Now, obviously, Marowak is lackluster. It's got base 425 stats. Its only real notable stat is its defense at 110. It's got a pure ground typing. It's got base 45 speed, base 60 HP, but only base 80 special defense. It's not going to be doing a lot. Now, obviously the thing about Marowak is that it has access to Thick Club, which is basically huge power in an item. Now what this does is it doubles its attack stat while it's holding the Thick Club. However, I think that that's absolutely not enough for Marowak to function as a good Pokemon, especially at only base 45 speed. This leaves it really super vulnerable to knockoff, even more so than a lot of other Pokemon. Base 80 attack is not getting it anywhere anyway, so there are a few things that I'd like to do to separate Alolan Marowak from its ground type competition, as well as make it very unique and a little bit better, frankly. So, you look at its abilities. Rockhead, very good ability, lets it not take any sort of recoil damage. Battle Armor and Lightning Rod are two abilities that are pretty useless as far as Marowak's concerned. It doesn't necessarily mind getting critical hit, just because it's already a little bit frail with base 60 HP, especially with base 80 special defense. It's not taking a special type hit anyway. Critical hits probably don't matter on it. And Lightning Rod, while it's nice to draw electric type moves potentially in doubles, it only has base 50 special attack and kind of goes as a throwaway ability that you'll probably never use, since Marowak is already immune to these electric type attacks anyway, being a ground type. So, what can we do to spice regular Marowak up a decent amount? I have a couple very exciting propositions. So I'm going to replace Battle Armor with Decidueye's hidden ability, Long Reach, and I'm also going to switch Lightning Rod for Parental Bond. Before we get into Parental Bond and all the shenanigans, let me tell you why I gave it Long Reach. Marowak is known to use its bone as a boomerang. It comes back to it, being able to hit opposing Pokemon without taking any sort of adverse contact damage yourself, being Iron Barbs, Rocky Helmet, Rough Skin. It doesn't necessarily help Marowak, but it is in fact an option. I think that because Marowak uses his bone as a projectile, it's an ability that fits it very well. Now we get into the meat and potatoes of this rebalance. Parental Bond, which is the signature ability of Mega Kangaskhan. Now you're like, whoa, why would you give Marowak Parental Bond? Well, I'll tell you. Basically, my logic is that Marowak is known as the mother Pokemon. It's known to wear its dead mother's skull on its head. It is fused to its head. It has the whole storyline in the Kanto games about Cubone's mother being taken by Team Rocket and killed, and you have to set free its spirit. I think that it makes sense for Marowak to have Parental Bond. Now, what does Parental Bond do? This lets Marowak get past substitutes. It lets it potentially break sturdies, break sashes, and lets it wall break a decent amount better. I know I'm going to get asked this, and I know that I should mention it. So why is Parental Bond super broken on Mega Kangaskhan and not on this version of Marowak? I'll tell you exactly why. Because this version of Marowak is much slower, it doesn't have any sort of priority. Although it has access to Power-Up Punch, it can use it twice. It can get a +2, but it already has access to Swords Dance, which regular Kangaskhan did not have access to. It has no priority, has no Fake Out, and is even less of a deal because of its speed tier. Now, let's take a moment to check out its stats. When I rebalanced Marowak, I gave it 10 points into its HP stat, 8 points into its defense, and 17 points into its speed, which means that its defensive profile is 70, 118, 80, and its new speed stat is 62. So yes, this outspeeds base 60s, but base 62 speed is nothing crazy, especially without any sort of priority. It would need to boost its speed first, or be running Trick Room to have any sort of offensive presence. That's why I don't think that Parental Bond on this Marowak is specifically that broken. So let's get into the additional moves I want to give Marowak. I don't want to give it any more stab moves. It already gets everything that it could possibly need as far as ground type moves, but I do want to give it some coverage. I want to give it Smackdown, Vital Throw, Revenge, and notably, Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword, I think, just makes sense. It's using a bone. It's a physical weapon. Anything with a physical weapon, Samurott, Surfetch'd, Farfetch'd, I think should have access to Sacred Sword. Setup and support, I want to give it Memento, and I want to give it Rock Polish. So, let's talk about the different things that Marowak can now do with all of these tools, right? Now, with its Thick Club, Marowak's attack stat basically doubles. And it has not really been able to use that outside of Trick Room. It's very vulnerable to knockoff. It's very vulnerable to special moves. It has no way to up its speed stat, so it's always going to be very, very slow, especially at its previous base 45 speed. With Rock Polish, this means that Marowak can actually set up and then stand a chance against the opposing team. Marowak can be slow, it can be a wall breaker. If you want to come in with Marowak on something that's very defensive, you can potentially break past it if your Thick Club is still with you, and assuming it's not knocked off, you can just hit double Earthquake. You can start setting up with Power-Up Punches, force something out into potentially something slower. It is still very frail. I did put 10 points into its HP to potentially let it take a hit a little bit better, as well as 8 points into its defense just to boost it enough so that it was slightly more impressive than base 110. The 17 points into its speed is what's really going to make the difference for how Marowak functions in the game, what it outspeeds, what it's able to outspeed after a +2. So I think that a combination of Parental Bond, access to a fighting type coverage in Sacred Sword, Earthquake, Knockoff, really, really helps Marowak a lot. Now, it can still be outsped, it can still be knocked off, it can still be tricked. A whole bunch of things can happen to Marowak, but these sorts of changes and abilities actually give Marowak a fighting chance when it comes to setting up, potentially sweeping, wall breaking, etc. While we're on the topic of Marowak, I did the exact same things for Alolan Marowak. So, I'm going to get right into it. I'm not going to waste any time. Alolan Marowak was already very good behind Trick Room. It had access to Shadow Bone. Ghost Fire is a much better typing than just Ground, although it is still extra vulnerable to Knockoff, being that Knockoff would actually kill Alolan Marowak most of the time. I did give it 10 points into its HP. I gave it 8 points into its defense, and as the same 17 points into its speed stat. I left Rockhead. I left Cursed Body. I decided not to give it Long Reach, since there's no mention that it uses this fiery pole as a sort of projectile. It's more of a bow staff sort of weapon. But I did get rid of Lightning Rod for Parental Bond. Now, Alolan Marowak was already fairly good. With this extra speed, though, it actually makes it so that it's not the most viable user of Trick Room, and instead has to rely on speed setup moves like the additional moves we're going to give it. I want to give Alolan Marowak a couple of different moves. I want to give it Flame Charge, Fiery Dance, which, come on. Literally, it's a fire dancer. Don't even get me started on this. Shadow Claw, Vital Throw, Sacred Sword, and Revenge, as well as Grudge and Memento. Now, so there's a couple of things that are very notable as far as the moves that we gave Alolan Marowak. Flame Charge, one of the biggest ones of them. If you use a Flame Charge with Parental Bond, that means that you're sitting at +2 speed, and you basically did the same, if not better damage than probably a base 65-70 fire type move. You're setting up as you're doing damage. You're still very vulnerable to knockoff, to priority, to sucker punch, to aqua jet, anything sort of like that you're already kind of weak to. But if all the checks are cleared for Alolan Marowak, it can start setting up flame charges, it can boost its speed, assuming that it's not able to have its Thick Club knocked off. It does have access to Power-Up Punch, with Parental Bond means it's sitting at a +2. This makes Alolan Marowak a lot better than it was previously. It's now no longer relegated to just simply a Trick Room wall breaker. I think Trick Room is pretty inconsistent in its design, and I think that having the ability to boost its speed with Flame Charge actually makes Alolan Marowak very viable as far as being a Ghost Fire type wall breaker, especially when competing with things like Chandelure and Blacephalon. Being a physical Ghost Fire type is something that's very, very unique, and having access to Parental Bond also lets it do the same things as regular Marowak. It can break Sturdies, it can break Focus Sashes, it can break through substitutes, assuming it's not going to get knocked off, Aqua Jetted, Sucker Punched. Alolan Marowak is a very solid cleaner with a better typing than regular Marowak, but also a few more drawbacks due to that typing, specifically a vulnerability to different forms of priority. I think that this, while it doesn't necessarily set the two of them apart, they're already set apart enough by their typing, so I didn't feel the need to make Alolan Marowak special or anything like that. I do think that giving it Parental Bond does make just as much sense as regular Marowak, and actually makes it a viable user of that ability. Which brings us to Hitmonlee. Not my personal favorite of the Hitmon trio, but the first one of the Hitmon trio that we're going to cover. So, I think the Hitmonlee is already pretty decent as it is. Having access to Unburden, Limber, Reckless is a super good ability. It has access to Rapid Spin, a number of very strong physical attacking moves. Its attack stats very nice in 120. Its special defense is actually pretty good as well in 110. While its base HP and defense are kind of lackluster, and it has basically non-existent special attack, it doesn't necessarily need that special attack either. I propose a few things for Hitmonlee. Nothing absolutely crazy, just a couple of additions to its moveset. I'm not going to change its abilities at all. Limber, Reckless, and Unburden, they all fit it thematically, as well as they're all fairly good. They can be used in different ways. Limber prevents paralysis. Reckless lets it do more damage with recoil-based moves. And Unburden is obviously the most common set. A Fake Out, Unburden, Normal Gem set. Very, very common. You'll see Hitmonlees used. You can even use a Rapid Spin Normal Gem Hitmonlee set. You can boost your speed even further while potentially also getting rid of hazards. I think that Hitmonlee is a very interesting fighting type because of these sorts of things. It's an Unburden user that's not Hawlucha, so you can use different kinds of seeds as well in Generation 8. You can use Misty Seed, Electric Seed, Grassy Seed, Psychic Seed, that sort of thing. The only things I want to do for Hitmonlee are to give it access to a few moves. As the kicking Pokemon, I think that giving Hitmonlee Triple Kick makes sense. Acrobatics, its limbs quite literally extend very, very far. I think the Acrobatics is really, really good, especially after an Unburden boost, having access to a flying type attack. Base 110, very, very nice for Hitmonlee, really help it. Being a base fighting type to have access to flying type coverage, very, very good. Lunge, because obviously look at those legs. I mean, it just makes total sense. Lowering an opponent's regular attack stat can also help Hitmonlee deal with psychic types that want to come in on it, as well as sort of help bolster its defense. 50-53 HP defense is going to mean so that Hitmonlee is not going to take a lot of physical attacks well anyway, and being able to potentially lower opposing Pokemon's attack while also attacking is very, very nice tool for it. And I also want to give it Triple Axle. This is more due to Hitmontop having it. Obviously, Hitmontop spinning on its head, but I think that Hitmonlee makes a lot of sense due to its ability to extend its legs and that sort of thing. Having this sort of coverage really, really helps it, and I think that that's really all that needs to be done to make Hitmonlee up to par in Generation 8. Last up for the video, Hitmonchan. Now, Hitmonchan is in the same boat as Hitmonlee, where I think the Hitmonchan is already quite good and actually is a little bit better in Generation 8 due to how Rapid Spin works. Its roll compression is very, very good. Mach Punch, Iron Fist, Drain Punch, Bullet Punch, Ice Punch. It's punching you. It's doing a lot of punching moves. It's based on a boxer. Very, very cool. But I think that there is an ability that we can change with Hitmonchan. Now, I'm not going to touch its stats at all. I think its stats are actually fine. 50-79 defensive profile. Better than Hitmonlee. Worse than Hitmontop. Good special defense. Less attack than Hitmonlee, but that's totally fine for what it's trying to do. As far as its abilities go, Iron Fist, Inner Focus, totally fine. Iron Fist, it's a boxer. Inner Focus, it's got to stay focused. But Keen Eye, I think, could be gotten rid of for something that boxers are known to have. Or rather, fighters in general. Yes, I'm talking about Moxie. You see it on the screen. Hitmonchan could be a pure fighting type with Moxie. After it gets a KO, it gets hype, it gets excited in the locker room. After round 1, it gets the boost, it spirals off of it. To me, it makes absolute sense for a boxer Pokemon like Hitmonchan to have access to Moxie. This also makes it so that its priority moves get increased. It can sort of function as a late game sweeper off a Rapid Spin. If it KOs with the Rapid Spin, if it boosts its speed enough, then all of a sudden you're hitting Drain Punch, you're hitting Power Up Punch, you're doing a bunch of damage. Keep in mind, you are not getting the Iron Fist boost as you are racking up these Moxie boosts. You can only have one or the other, so you can't stack these superpowered Bullet Punches, Mach Punches with this Moxie boost. I think this is totally fair. As far as its additional moves go, I want to give it access to Arm Thrust, as well as coverage in First Impression, Sucker Punch, Payback, and Poison Jab. Payback and Poison Jab. Poison Jab because it is a punching type move. I think it makes sense for Hitmonchan to have. Lets it deal with fairies besides Bullet Punch. Payback, obviously, after getting a couple hits in the ring, I think that having a dark type move like that helps a lot. Sucker Punch, it's a Pokemon focused around the idea of punching. I think it helps it a lot. And First Impression, this is another priority move that Hitmonchan has access to. It's got Vacuum Wave, it's got Mach Punch, it's got Bullet Punch. Let it have First Impression. Let it deal with the Psychic types. Let it come in, really quickly hit something, potentially boost off of it with Moxie. You can't run any sort of like Banded First Impression, but I think that it makes sense for Hitmonchan as an archetype of a Pokemon. Something like Sirfetch'd gets First Impression, and I think it makes sense for a boxer Pokemon. This idea of Hitmonchan coming into the ring, boosting off of its opponent after round, leaving a First Impression, getting a really good licks in, potentially a Sucker Punch in or two. I think that makes Hitmonchan really good, gives it a couple forms of priority. It can literally run all priority if it wants to. It can Mach Punch, Bullet Punch, First Impression, Sucker Punch with Moxie. I think that makes Hitmonchan super, super unique, super cool, and differentiates it a lot from other fighting type Pokemon. And that is going to do it as far as this episode of Rebalancing Pokemon. We did cover a number of Pokemon this episode. We got through Electrode, we got through the Exeggutors, the Marowaks, and 2 of the 3 Hitmons. Let me know your thoughts about Moxie Hitmonchan, 175 base speed Electrode, Grassy Surge Exeggutor, as well as the Parental Bond Marowaks. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Every little bit of support absolutely helps me. I am a one-man show after all. Remember that this is all for fun. Let me know below if you agree, disagree with anything that I've done. If you have any sort of comments, questions, concerns, I'd be more than happy to address them. Tell me about them. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you do. Let me know what you think I should do. I have a ton of fun talking to you guys. Anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you all for watching. Till next time.